The year is 48 BC. Julius Caesar stands on the harbour of Alexandria, watching flames consume the greatest repository of human knowledge ever assembled. What Caesar couldn't know as he ordered those ships burned was that he had just altered the trajectory of human civilization for the next 2 millennia. In those flames died not just 400,000 scrolls, but potentially centuries of scientific advancement that might have put humans on Mars before Columbus reached America. Today's video will explore one of history's greatest what-ifs. How would our world look if the Library of Alexandria had never burned? The answer is both more extraordinary and more terrifying than you might imagine. To understand what we lost, let's talk about what and how much was actually lost when the Library of Alexandria was burned down. This wasn't just a library in the modern sense, it was humanity's first true research university, a place where the greatest minds of the ancient world gathered to push the boundaries of human knowledge. The scholars working there weren't just preserving existing texts. They were actively conducting experiments, making discoveries and developing technologies that wouldn't be rediscovered for over 1,000 years. Consider what they had already achieved by the time Caesar's fires began to spread. Eratosthenes had calculated the Earth's circumference to within 2% accuracy, using nothing but shadows and geometry. Aristarchus had proposed that the Earth orbited the Sun, 17 centuries before Copernicus. Hero of Alexandria had built the first steam engine, a device that could have launched the Industrial Revolution in the 1st century AD instead of the 18th. But what the ancient world possessed in intellectual brilliance, it lacked in one crucial element: institutional continuity. When Alexandria burned, and when the remaining collections were gradually destroyed over the following centuries, humanity lost not just individual discoveries, but entire chains of scientific reasoning that had taken generations to develop. The mathematics of this loss are staggering. Modern scholars estimate that we possess less than 10% of all classical Greek literature. In medicine alone, we know the names of over 600 ancient physicians, but we have complete works from fewer than 20. Imagine if 90% of modern medical knowledge simply vanished. That's the scale of what disappeared with Alexandria. If Alexandria had survived, the first and most dramatic difference would be in the human lifespan. And I'm not talking about marginal improvements of a few months or years. I'm talking about centuries of medical knowledge that simply vanished, taking with it treatments, surgical techniques, and anatomical understanding that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 1500s or later. The library contained the complete works of physicians like Galen, whose anatomical knowledge was so advanced that his texts remained the standard medical reference until the Renaissance, over 1,000 years after his death. Think about that. Galen, working in the 2nd century AD, understood human anatomy so thoroughly that medieval and Renaissance physicians were still learning from his books 1,200 years later. His descriptions of the circulatory system, the nervous system, and organ function were remarkably accurate. He documented over 500 different muscles in the human body. He understood that the brain, not the heart, was the centre of consciousness and sensation. But here's what most people don't realise. Galen was just one of hundreds of medical researchers working in Alexandria during its golden age. He wasn't an isolated genius. He was part of an intellectual tradition that stretched back centuries. Herophilus and Erasistratus, working at the Museum of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC, were performing systematic human dissections, 400 years before Galen was even born. They distinguished between sensory and motor nerves. They understood the difference between arteries and veins. Herophilus accurately described the structure of the eye, including the retina, and pioneered techniques for measuring pulse rates as diagnostic tools. These physicians had access to the world's largest collection of medical texts, thousands of scrolls containing case studies, surgical procedures, pharmaceutical recipes, and anatomical observations accumulated over centuries. Imagine having every medical journal Every research paper, every clinical trial from the past 500 years, all in one place, cross-referenced and available for study. That's what Alexandria represented for ancient physicians. But it wasn't just about having books. The library came with detailed anatomical drawings, illustrations that showed the structure of organs, the pathways of blood vessels, the branching of nerves. These weren't crude sketches. Ancient sources describe anatomical diagrams so precise they were used to train surgeons. Most of these illustrations were lost forever when the library was dismantled. Medieval physicians would spend centuries trying to redraw human anatomy from memory and limited dissections, often getting it spectacularly wrong. And most importantly, Alexandria provided something even rarer than knowledge: institutional support to conduct systematic research. The Ptolemaic kings who founded the library understood that medical advancement required not just individual brilliance, but sustained funded research programs. The Museum of Alexandria functioned like a modern research university. Physicians received stipends that freed them from private practice so they could focus on research. They had access to cadavers for dissection, something that would become nearly impossible in the Christian medieval period. They could collaborate with mathematicians, engineers, and philosophers working in the same complex. This institutional structure meant that medical knowledge could accumulate and build on itself, rather than being lost when individual physicians died. When that system collapsed, medicine didn't just stagnate, it regressed catastrophically. The Romans, despite their engineering genius, never matched Alexandrian medical sophistication. Medieval Europe lost even basic surgical techniques that had been routine in ancient Alexandria. The human cost was measured in millions of preventable deaths over centuries of medical Dark Ages. Ancient Alexandrian physicians were already performing cataract surgery, setting complex bone fractures and using opium for pain relief. They understood the circulation of blood, a discovery not officially made in Europe until William Harvey in 1628. If this knowledge had been preserved and built upon continuously, rather than lost and rediscovered, human medicine could have advanced by centuries. If medical knowledge had progressed steadily from the 3rd century BC onward, instead of stagnating for over a millennium, we might have developed germ theory by 500 AD instead of 1860. Antibiotics could have been discovered in the 8th century rather than the 20th. The average human lifespan, which remained around 30 to 35 years from ancient times until the modern era, might have begun increasing steadily from late antiquity onward. By today, humans might routinely live 120 to 150 years, not through modern genetic engineering, but through 2 millennia of continuous medical advancement. The demographic implications alone would have reshaped all of human history, but medicine was just the beginning. The real game changer would have been in physics and engineering. Hero steam engine wasn't just a clever toy. It was a working demonstration of principles that could have launched an industrial revolution 1,700 years early. The Alexandrian engineers who built it understood gear ratios, hydraulic pressure, and mechanical advantage. They had the theoretical knowledge. They simply lacked the economic incentive to scale up production. If Alexandria had survived, that incentive might have emerged. Continuous technological developments could have led to steam-powered ships crossing the Mediterranean by 200 AD. Steam-powered mills could have revolutionized agriculture and manufacturing centuries before the medieval period. The economic surplus generated by early industrialization could have funded even more research, creating a positive feedback loop of technological advancement. The implications for exploration would have been revolutionary. With steam power available in late antiquity, ocean-going vessels could have reached the Americas by 400 AD. Chinese and Roman steamships might have been trading across the Pacific by 600 AD. The age of global exploration and colonization could have begun over 1,000 years early, fundamentally altering the development of human civilization. Even more dramatically, early industrialization might have led to space exploration, beginning in the medieval period. This isn't science fiction, it's a logical extrapolation of accelerated technological development. If steam engines had been perfected by 200 AD, internal combustion engines might have appeared by 800 AD. Rocket technology, which depends on understanding combustion and metallurgy, could have emerged by 1200 AD. Picture this alternative timeline. While medieval Europe in our world was building cathedrals, an unbroken chain of Alexandrian research might have produced the first rockets. The mathematical knowledge was already there. Ancient Greek mathematicians understood ballistics and orbital mechanics. What they lacked was the engineering capability to build vehicles that could reach escape velocity. With continuous technological development, the first human might have reached space not in 1961, but in 1400. The moon landing might have occurred in 1500, during what we call the Renaissance. Mars exploration could have begun in the 1600s, when in our timeline Europeans were just beginning to colonize the Americas. The electrical revolution would have come even earlier. Ancient Greeks already knew about static electricity and magnetic properties. Alexandrian researchers had access to detailed observations of electrical phenomena from across the known world. With institutional continuity and systematic research, they might have developed practical applications for electricity by 500 AD. Imagine electric lighting illuminating the streets of Constantinople in 800 AD, while Europe in our timeline was stumbling through the Dark Ages. Telegraph networks could have connected the Roman Empire by 900 AD, enabling instant communication across continents. The printing press, powered by electricity rather than manual labour, might have appeared in 1000 AD instead of 1450. This brings us to perhaps the most significant difference. There would have been no Dark Ages. The period from roughly 500 to 1000 AD, when European learning stagnated and much classical knowledge was lost, occurred precisely because institutions like Alexandria had been destroyed. If the library had survived, it would have continued to attract scholars, preserve knowledge, and generate new discoveries throughout this period. Instead of a millennium of intellectual stagnation, we might have seen continuous advancement. By 1000 AD, when Europe in our timeline was just beginning to recover classical learning, an unbroken Alexandrian tradition might have produced technologies we associate with the 19th century: steam engines, electric generators, advanced metallurgy, and precision manufacturing. The Renaissance, when it finally came, would have been completely different. Instead of rediscovering lost classical texts, 15th century scholars would have been building on 2 millennia of continuous research. The scientific revolution might have occurred in 1200 AD instead of 1600 AD. Galileo's telescopes might have been invented in 1300, Newton's laws discovered in 1400, and Darwin's evolution proposed in 1500. But here's where the scenario becomes truly mind-bending. We might not exist at all. The butterfly effect of such massive historical changes would have altered the course of human development so dramatically that the specific chain of events leading to your birth and mine would never have occurred. Every war, migration, marriage, and birth that led to our existence depended on the specific historical timeline we actually experienced. If Alexandria had survived, the Roman Empire might never have fallen. And I'm not engaging in wild speculation here. There's a serious historical argument to be made that continuous technological advancements could have given Rome the military and economic advantages needed to resist barbarian invasions. Think about what brought Rome down: overstretched supply lines, economic stagnation, inability to field and equip armies fast enough to meet multiple threats simultaneously. These weren't inevitable problems. They were technological limitations. Now imagine a Roman Empire with steam-powered logistics. The legions that took months to march from Britain to Persia could have been transported in weeks by rail. Supplies that moved at the pace of ox carts could have been shipped at unprecedented speeds. The communication delays that made governing a continental empire nearly impossible, where a message from Rome to the eastern frontier could take 2 months, would have been eliminated by electric telegraph. An emperor in Rome could have coordinated with generals in Germany and administrators in Egypt in real time. Advanced metallurgy for weapons would have been equally transformative. The Germanic tribes that eventually overran the Western Empire did so, partly because they'd adopted Roman military technology. The playing field had levelled. But imagine Roman armies equipped with steel that wouldn't shatter in cold weather, with cannons centuries before they actually appeared, with manufacturing capacity that could produce standardized weapons and armor at industrial scale. The barbarians would have been facing not just a more numerous army, but one equipped with weapons they couldn't match or even comprehend. Electric communication alone could have made the empire unassailable. The problem with defending vast frontiers wasn't just military, it was informational. By the time Rome learned about an invasion, the invaders were already deep into imperial territory. But with telegraph lines linking every fort and garrison, every border crossing and provincial capital, the Romans could have responded to threats with a speed that would have seemed supernatural to their enemies. Intelligence would have flowed instantly. Reinforcements could have been coordinated across thousands of miles. The element of surprise, which barbarian raiders depended on, would have been eliminated. But here's where it gets really wild. A surviving Roman Empire with Alexandrian technology might have expanded globally centuries earlier than European colonization actually occurred. And I'm not talking about small trading outposts. I'm talking about true global dominance that would make the British Empire look provincial by comparison. Roman steamships, and we know the theoretical foundations for steam power existed in ancient Alexandria, thanks to Hero's Aeoli Pile, could have reached Australia by 600 AD. Think about that timeline. While in our history the Roman Empire was fragmenting into successor kingdoms, in this alternate timeline Roman explorers could have been mapping the Australian coastline over 800 years before Captain Cook. Aboriginal Australians might have encountered Roman legionaries in the 7th century, leading to cultural exchanges and conflicts we can barely imagine. The Americas would have followed shortly after. Roman colonies could have been established in the Americas by 700 AD, nearly 800 years before Columbus. We're talking about Roman cities rising in Mexico while in our timeline. The Mayan civilization was at its height. Roman settlements along the eastern seaboard of North America, while Vikings were still centuries away from their brief visits. The entire history of the Western Hemisphere would have been fundamentally different. Would the Aztec or Inca empires have ever formed if Rome had colonized the Americas a millennium earlier? By 1000 AD, Rome could have created a truly global empire spanning all continents. This wouldn't be like ancient Rome, barely connected by sail-powered ships and taking months to traverse. This would be an integrated industrial empire with steam-powered transportation, electric communication, and the administrative capacity to actually govern on a planetary scale. Every continent except Antarctica could have had Roman colonies, Roman roads, Roman cities, all connected by technologies that wouldn't exist in our timeline for another 800 years. The demographic implications are staggering, and this is where we need to pause and really think about the numbers. With advanced medicine extending lifespans, and we've already discussed how sophisticated Alexandrian medicine was, infant mortality would have plummeted. People would have lived not just longer, but healthier lives. Surgical techniques that wouldn't be rediscovered until the 19th century in our timeline would have been routine. Diseases that killed millions would have been understood, prevented or treated. Combine that medical revolution with industrial technology, supporting larger populations. Agriculture powered by steam engines and chemical fertilizers. Yes, the Greeks understood chemistry well enough that this would have been possible. Food production would have exploded. Cities could have grown to sizes unimaginable in the ancient world. The constraints that kept human population relatively stable for millennia would have been shattered. The world might have reached 1 billion people by 1000 AD instead of 1800 AD. That's a staggering acceleration. 800 years of demographic growth compressed into essentially nothing. And once you've crossed the billion-person threshold with industrial technology, the growth becomes exponential. By today, in 2025, the global population could be 50 billion or more, supported by technologies we can barely imagine. We're talking about a civilization that's had 2 extra millennia to develop solutions for feeding, housing and managing populations on a scale we've never had to contemplate. 50 billion people. That's more than 6 times our current population. Where would they all live? How would they be fed? What would the planet even look like with that many humans? But, and here's the dark side of this alternative history, this massive population would face challenges we never encountered, or at least not in the same form. Climate change might have begun in the medieval period. We're struggling with climate change now after maybe 250 years of industrial activity. But imagine steam-powered industrialization pumping carbon into the atmosphere for an extra millennium. 1,000 additional years of burning coal, of deforestation for industrial agriculture, of releasing greenhouse gases at levels that would have been unthinkable in our medieval period. The environmental crisis we're experiencing today, the melting ice caps, the extreme weather, the rising sea levels, all of that might have occurred in 1500 AD. Picture it. While in our timeline Leonardo da Vinci was painting the Mona Lisa, and Europe was on the cusp of the age of exploration, in this alternate timeline, humanity would have been facing planetary environmental collapse. They would have been forced to develop technological solutions centuries earlier, or face extinction. And that pressure might have accelerated innovation even further. Nuclear technology, following the same accelerated timeline, might have been developed by 1600 AD. We discovered nuclear physics in the early 20th century, but that was building on centuries of scientific foundation. A civilization with 2,000 years of continuous scientific advancement. They could have split the atom during what we call the Enlightenment period. The atomic age could have begun in the 1600s. Think about the implications. Nuclear weapons might have been used in conflicts between steam-powered empires in the 17th century, the same century that saw the 30 Years' War in our timeline. Except instead of muskets and cannons, they would have had atomic bombs. The death toll could have been apocalyptic. Human civilization might have ended long before we were born, wiped out by nuclear weapons wielded by empires that never learned the lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they had discovered nuclear physics centuries too early. But there's another path, perhaps even more dramatic. Early nuclear development might have led to fusion power by 1700 AD. If you have nuclear weapons by 1600, the scientific understanding that leads to controlled fusion reactions isn't far behind. Fusion power, clean, virtually unlimited energy, could have been achieved in the 18th century. That would have solved the energy crisis that steam-powered industrialization created. No more burning coal, no more greenhouse gas emissions, just clean energy at a scale that would have enabled technological leaps we can barely comprehend. With fusion power, the sky literally would no longer be the limit. Interstellar travel might have begun in the 18th century. The rocket's equation is well understood. You need massive amounts of energy to escape Earth's gravity and even more to reach relativistic speeds. But with fusion drives, suddenly the energy requirements become manageable. Human colonies could have been spreading to nearby star systems by 1800 AD, the same year Thomas Jefferson was president in our timeline. By now, by 2025 in this alternate history, humanity might be a multi-star system civilization. There could be human colonies orbiting Alpha Centauri, thriving settlements around Tau Ceti, outposts throughout the local stellar neighborhood. We would be not just a planetary species but a cosmic one, with a presence spanning light years and involving populations we can't even estimate. All because those scrolls in Alexandria didn't burn. The social implications would be equally revolutionary. Continuous technological advancement might have eliminated scarcity much earlier, potentially preventing many of the wars and conflicts that shaped our history. But it might also have created new forms of inequality and social tension that we never experienced. Advanced technology in the hands of ancient empires might have created forms of surveillance and control that would make modern authoritarianism look primitive. Roman emperors with electric communication, advanced transportation and industrial production capabilities might have created totalitarian states more oppressive than anything in our timeline. The religious implications are equally profound. Christianity's rise depended partly on the intellectual vacuum left by the destruction of classical learning. If Alexandria had survived, maintaining Greek philosophical traditions and scientific rationalism, Christianity might never have achieved dominance. The entire religious landscape of the world could be completely different. Islam's golden age of learning, which preserved much classical knowledge, might never have occurred because that knowledge would never have been lost in the first place. The Crusades, the Reformation, and countless religious wars might never have happened, replaced by entirely different conflicts we can't even imagine. Perhaps most intriguingly, the survival of Alexandria might have led to spacefaring human civilization, encountering alien life centuries ago. If we had reached other star systems by 1800 AD, first contact with extraterrestrial intelligence might be ancient history rather than future speculation. The mathematics of accelerated development suggest that a civilization with a 2,000-year head start in technology might have achieved things we consider impossible. Faster than light travel, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, or even technologies that transcend our current understanding of physics. But here's the ultimate paradox. If human civilization had advanced so dramatically, would we still be, recognizably, human? 2 millennia of additional medical and genetic knowledge might have led to directed human evolution. The people living in our alternative 2024 might be as different from us as we are from our ancient ancestors. They might have eliminated aging entirely, enhanced human intelligence through genetic modification, or even uploaded human consciousness into artificial substrates. The burning of Alexandria might have been the difference between humanity remaining biological and becoming something entirely post-human. In the end, Caesar's decision to burn those ships in Alexandria harbour might have been one of the most consequential moments in human history. Those flames didn't just destroy books, they may have destroyed entire alternative futures where humans live for centuries, travel between stars and possess technologies that seem magical to us today. Or perhaps they saved us from futures too terrible to imagine. Nuclear war in the medieval period, environmental collapse in the Renaissance, or the emergence of technological tyrannies that would have crushed human freedom before it could fully develop. We'll never know what we lost when Alexandria burned, but we can be certain of this. The world we inhabit today, with all its problems and possibilities, exists only because those ancient scrolls turned to ash in Caesar's fires. In their destruction, our specific timeline was born.